The humiliation was deliberate, calculated. Elijah Walker, decorated Special Forces veteran, stood motionless as Claire, the head flight attendant, denied him his paid first-class seat with practiced disdain. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere," she suggested, her words slicing through the cabin's recycled air. Passengers stared. Some smirked. Others looked away. None of them noticed the silver-haired man in first class, General William Braxley, watching with cold satisfaction, as his former subordinate retreated to coach without protest. They couldn't know that this racial slight was merely the opening move in Braxley's elaborate plot to eliminate the only man who knew his darkest secret. Elijah checked his watch as he settled into his cramped seat. 45 minutes. That's all the time he had to uncover the truth before everyone on Flight 303 became expendable pieces in a deadly conspiracy that had been years in the making. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The terminal bustled with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to their gates. Elijah Walker moved through the crowd with quiet purpose, his weathered olive-green military jacket hanging loose on his broad frame. The faded American flag patch on his sleeve had seen better days, much like the man who wore it. He carried nothing but a worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder, moving with the measured stride of someone who'd learned to conserve energy for when it truly mattered. Flight 303 to Denver was boarding when Elijah reached the gate. He waited patiently as families with small children and those needing assistance boarded first. When first class was called, he stepped forward, ticket in hand. The boarding attendant nodded and waved him through without a second glance. It wasn't until he stepped onto the plane that the first hint of trouble appeared. Claire Daniels, the head flight attendant, greeted passengers with a practiced smile that faltered when Elijah approached. Her blue eyes flicked from his face to his jacket, then to the ticket he held out. "First class?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of suspicion that made several nearby passengers turn their heads. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied, his deep voice quiet but firm. He'd learned long ago that speaking softly often carried more weight than shouting. Claire's perfectly manicured fingers took the boarding pass, examining it as though she expected to find it counterfeit. "That can't be right," she muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "Is there a problem?" Elijah asked, maintaining his composure despite the familiar sinking feeling in his stomach. "This seat, 2A. It's in first class," Claire said, her tone suggesting this was somehow impossible. Elijah nodded once. "That's correct." Another flight attendant, younger, with kind eyes and a name tag reading Melissa, approached. "Everything okay, Claire?" Claire thrust the boarding pass toward her colleague. "Can you double-check this? He says he's in 2A. Melissa glanced at the pass, then at Elijah, offering an apologetic smile. "This is correct, sir. Seat 2A in first class." Despite the confirmation, Claire shook her head. "There must be some mistake. We have protocols." She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. "What protocols, specifically?" Elijah asked, his voice still measured but with an edge that spoke of a man who'd faced this particular battle too many times before. Before Claire could respond, a middle-aged white man already seated in first class leaned into the aisle, his expensive watch glinting under the cabin lights. "He probably bought that ticket off Craigslist," he said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. A few passengers chuckled. Elijah didn't react, his expression remaining neutral as he'd been trained to do in far more dangerous situations than casual racism at 30,000 feet. "Sir?" Claire said, handing back his boarding pass with obvious reluctance. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in another section?" Elijah felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him, some curious, some hostile, some embarrassed on his behalf. For a moment, his mind flashed to another time, another place. The desert heat of Sudan, the weight of his rifle, the medals they'd pinned to his chest before taking them away again. The face of a young lieutenant named Braxley, bloodied but alive because Elijah had refused to leave him behind. He blinked, and the cabin came back into focus. He could fight this battle, but something in his gut told him to stand down. Not today, not here. "That's fine," he said, taking back his boarding pass. "I'll sit in, coach." Claire's relief was palpable as she directed him toward the back of the plane. As Elijah made his way down the narrow aisle, he caught sight of 3 men in the middle section who didn't quite fit with the other passengers. Their haircuts, posture, and the way their eyes tracked him spoke of military training. One of them, a man with close-cropped blonde hair and a square jaw that had taken more than a few hits, gave Elijah a subtle nod of recognition. Commander Luke Anders. Navy SEAL. They'd crossed paths in operations that didn't exist on paper. The 2 men flanking him were clearly also SEALs, their bodies coiled with the same restrained energy that Anders carried. Elijah returned the nod almost imperceptibly before continuing toward the back. He found his reassigned seat, 22C, a middle seat in coach, and settled in, placing his duffel under the seat in front of him. A few minutes later, a young woman with curly auburn hair and bright green eyes slid into the window seat beside him. She struggled to stuff an overstuffed backpack under the seat, muttering under her breath. "Stupid airline seats designed for hobbits," she grumbled, finally shoving the bag into submission. She turned to Elijah with a friendly smile. "Hi there, I'm Harper Bennett. Looks like we'll be neighbors for the next few hours." "Elijah Walker," he replied, offering a brief handshake. Harper tilted her head, studying him. "I saw what happened up front," she said, lowering her voice. "That was really messed up." Elijah shrugged. "Happens." "That doesn't make it okay," Harper said, indignation coloring her tone. "I'm a law student at Columbia. What they did could be grounds for—" "It's fine," Elijah cut her off gently but firmly. "Not worth the trouble." Harper looked like she wanted to argue, but instead bit her lip and nodded. "If you say so." As the final passengers boarded, Elijah noticed a teenage boy a few rows ahead filming the continuing boarding process with his phone. The teen had captured the entire first-class confrontation, Elijah realized, though he appeared to be doing so discreetly, keeping the phone partially hidden. The plane filled quickly, and soon the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Elijah's attention drifted toward first class, where Claire was attending to the passengers with a warmth that had been notably absent during their interaction. Then he saw him, a tall man with silver-gray hair and broad shoulders that spoke of years of physical training despite his age. He wore civilian clothes, an expensive suit that couldn't quite disguise the military bearing beneath it. General William Braxley, the man who had once been Lieutenant Braxley, the man Elijah had saved, the man who later destroyed Elijah's career. Their eyes met across the length of the plane. A flicker of recognition passed between them, charged with history and unspoken accusations. Then Braxley looked away, turning to accept a pre-flight drink from Claire with practiced charm. Elijah felt his heart rate increase slightly, the only outward sign of the adrenaline now coursing through his system. Braxley's presence wasn't a coincidence. Nothing involving that man ever was. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming passengers and announcing their imminent departure. As the plane began to taxi, Elijah leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. Whatever game Braxley was playing, Elijah knew one thing for certain: he was a pawn in it. And pawns were meant to be sacrificed. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, the gentle hum of the engine settling into a rhythmic background noise. Up in first class, William Braxley, or Mr. Turner, as his ticket identified him, pulled out his phone and switched it to airplane mode before anyone could notice he hadn't done so earlier. A secure message notification blinked on his screen. Elijah on board. Proceed with Delta Protocol. 45 minutes. Braxley's lips tightened momentarily, before he schooled his features back into neutral indifference. He typed a single word in response. Confirmed. Then he deleted both messages and slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket, accepting a glass of bourbon from Claire with a charming smile that never reached his cold eyes. In the galley between first class and coach, Claire checked to make sure no passengers were nearby before pulling out a burner phone from her uniform pocket. It vibrated once and she quickly answered. "Yes?" she whispered, her back to the cabin. The black veteran in the olive jacket, a distorted voice responded. "Get him to snap. Make it public." We'll do the rest. Claire swallowed hard. I've already moved him to coach. Not enough. We need him agitated, visible. Use whatever means necessary. The line went dead. Claire closed her eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and plastered her professional smile back on before returning to her duties. Back in coach, Harper was studying Elijah's jacket with obvious curiosity. That flag patch, she said, gesturing to his sleeve. It looks like it's been through a lot. Elijah glanced down at the faded stars and stripes. It has. Military? Harper asked, though it wasn't really a question. Elijah nodded once. Was. My dad was Army, Harper offered. 2 tours in Iraq. Something softened slightly in Elijah's expression. He make it back okay? Harper's face clouded. No, not okay. She didn't elaborate, and Elijah didn't push. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable but heavy with shared understanding of loss. After a moment, Harper pulled out her phone and began scrolling through social media. Elijah noticed her typing his name into a search bar and subtly angled his body away, giving her privacy for her curiosity. Harper's eyes widened slightly as she read. Declassified reports about a dishonorable discharge. Murky allegations of insubordination during a classified operation. Congressional hearings held behind closed doors. A highly decorated soldier's career ended under suspicious circumstances. She glanced at Elijah, questions forming on her lips. But something in his distant expression made her hold them back. Instead, she returned to her phone, digging deeper into the contradictory reports about the man sitting beside her. 3 rows ahead, Commander Luke Anders leaned over to the SEAL on his right, speaking so quietly that only someone with trained hearing could have caught his words. Braxley's here. Elijah too. Something's wrong. The younger SEAL Davis nodded almost imperceptibly. Orders. Observe for now. But stay alert. This isn't coincidence. Anders glanced back toward Elijah, their eyes meeting briefly. There was history there. Mutual respect forged in operations that officially never happened. Anders had always doubted the official narrative about Elijah's dismissal. The man he knew wouldn't have abandoned civilians no matter what the reports claimed. Elijah closed his eyes, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. Behind his eyelids, memories played like film footage. Sudan. 5 years ago. A covert extraction mission gone sideways. Rebels had surrounded the village where American aid workers were stationed. Elijah's team was sent in to get them out quietly. No diplomatic incidents, no news coverage. But there had been more civilians than intelligence had indicated. Dozens more. When Braxley, then a rising star leading his first major operation, ordered Elijah to take just the American targets and leave the locals to their fate, Elijah had refused. "We don't leave innocents to die, sir," he'd said over the radio, the sound of gunfire in the background. "Those aren't your orders, Walker," Braxley had responded, his voice cold. "Extract the packages only. That's an order." Elijah had switched off his radio and proceeded to evacuate everyone he could. When the dust settled, he'd saved 37 civilians, including children, along with the aid workers. And he'd dragged a wounded Braxley from the burning command post when rebels had attacked their position. His reward? Braxley buried the scandal of his own failed leadership by pinning the blame on Elijah. Accusations of insubordination, endangering the mission, even planting evidence suggesting Elijah had leaked intelligence to local warlords. The dishonorable discharge had been just the beginning. Braxley had made sure Elijah's name was synonymous with betrayal in certain military circles. Made sure doors closed in his face. Made sure the truth stayed buried. Elijah opened his eyes, returning to the present as the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The memory faded, but the bitter taste it left remained. At the back of the plane, the third SEAL, Thompson, was frowning. He'd been feeling subtle vibrations through the floor, different from the normal engine vibrations he was trained to recognize. He pulled out a specialized phone and ran a quick scan. The heat signature from the cargo hold was unusual. "Sir," he whispered to Anders when he returned to his seat. "Something's off in the cargo bay. Heat signature doesn't match the manifest." Anders nodded. check the internal logs, see if anything was loaded last minute. Thompson tapped into the Airline system using a device that looked like a standard tablet. Got it. Unregistered cargo. Loaded 20 minutes before boarding. No details. Harper, still scrolling through information about Elijah, suddenly straightened in her seat. 2 rows ahead, a nervous-looking man in his 30s was fidgeting with a laptop bag. As she watched, he stood up, claiming to need the restroom. On his way back, he paused beside another passenger, a woman in a business suit who barely acknowledged him. In a movement so smooth it was nearly invisible, the man swapped his laptop bag with an identical one sitting beside the woman's seat. Elijah had caught the motion too. His eyes tracked the man as he returned to his seat, now carrying a different bag that looked identical to the one he'd left with. It was the kind of sleight of hand Elijah had seen in covert drops during his military days. "Did you see that?" Harper whispered. Elijah gave a slight nod. "Stay here," he murmured, unbuckling his seatbelt. He made his way toward the lavatory at the back of the plane, his movements casual but purposeful. Once inside, he locked the door and quickly examined the small space. Years of training had taught him to look for what others missed. It took him less than 30 seconds to find it, a small device attached to the air vent above the sink. Not standard equipment, a transmitter, military grade, designed to monitor conversations in the cabin. Someone was listening to everything happening on this flight. Elijah carefully replaced the vent cover without disturbing the device. Knowledge was advantage, and right now, he needed every edge he could get. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Reynolds was running through routine checks when his co-pilot, Frank Miller, frowned at the navigation system. "That's weird," Miller said, tapping the screen. "Getting some kind of override signal." Before Reynolds could respond, the navigation screen flickered, then stabilized. A warning message flashed. "System override initiated." The autopilot engaged with a soft beep. What the hell? Reynolds tried to disengage the autopilot, but the controls didn't respond. A new message appeared on the screen. "Maintaining present course. Do not deviate." "Try the backup systems," Reynolds ordered, a note of panic creeping into his voice. Miller flipped switches rapidly, his training kicking in despite his rising alarm. "Nothing's responding. Someone's locked us out of our own damn plane." Reynolds reached for the radio to contact air traffic control, but static filled the channel. "We're being jammed," he said, his face pale beneath his tan. "This isn't a malfunction. This is deliberate." Back in coach, Elijah returned to his seat, his face betraying nothing of what he'd discovered. Harper looked at him questioningly, but he gave a small shake of his head. "Not now. Not here." The plane continued its journey westward, most of its passengers blissfully unaware of the invisible countdown that had begun. 45 minutes until whatever Braxley had planned reached its conclusion. 45 minutes for Elijah to uncover the truth and somehow stop it. In first class, Braxley sipped his bourbon and checked his watch. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Soon, Elijah Walker would no longer be a problem, and no one would ever know the truth about Sudan, or the other operations Braxley had manipulated for his own advancement. The general smiled to himself as he gazed out the window at the endless blue sky. By the time this flight landed, his legacy would be secure, and the last witness to his crimes would be gone. Not just disgraced, but destroyed. Elijah glanced toward first class, feeling Braxley's invisible pull like gravity. Whatever game the general was playing, Elijah knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was running out of time. The teen vlogger a few rows ahead continued filming discreetly, capturing moments that would soon become evidence in a conspiracy, none of them yet fully understood. His camera caught Claire's suspicious glances toward Elijah, the SEAL's subtle communications, and the nervous courier who'd swapped the laptop bags. Small pieces of a much larger puzzle, coming together minute by minute as Flight 303 cruised onward, carrying its passengers toward a destination that none of them had signed up for. Outside, the sky was clear and boundless. Inside, storm clouds were gathering, invisible but no less dangerous for their concealment. Elijah checked his watch. 40 minutes remaining. At the rear of the plane, One of the flight attendants opened the service door to the galley and gasped. Taped to the inside of a cabinet was a digital timer, silently counting down. She slammed the cabinet shut and hurried toward the front, unaware that she had just glimpsed one small component of a much larger, deadlier plan already in motion. In his seat, Elijah felt the slight change in the plane's heading, a deviation so subtle that only someone with his training would notice. He looked out Harper's window at the position of the sun. They were no longer flying due west. The course had changed, and with it whatever time Elijah might have had to prepare had just run out. Commander Anders felt it too. He caught Elijah's eye across the cabin and gave a barely perceptible nod. It had begun. Harper noticed the sudden tension in Elijah's posture. "Is everything okay?" she whispered. "No," Elijah replied quietly, his eyes scanning the cabin for potential threats. "But it will be." He hoped that wasn't a lie. Up in first class, Braxley set down his empty glass and nodded to Claire as she passed. The flight attendant's hand trembled slightly as she took the glass, a detail that didn't escape the general's notice. "Steady now," he murmured, his voice soft but carrying an unmistakable threat. "We're just getting started." Claire hurried away, her practiced smile now a brittle mask. Whatever she'd signed up for, she was beginning to realize it was far more than she'd bargained for. The plane continued its new course, the majority of its passengers unaware that they had become pawns in a deadly game of revenge, power, and buried secrets. A game where the stakes weren't measured in dollars or reputation, but in human lives. 35 minutes remained until Delta Protocol was fully activated. 35 minutes for Elijah to uncover the truth and somehow stop a man who had already destroyed his life once before. The clock was ticking. The plane continued its steady course through clear skies, though for Elijah Walker, storm clouds were gathering with every passing minute. He checked his watch, 32 minutes remaining on whatever countdown Braxley had set in motion. Time to make a move. Elijah caught Commander Anders's eye and tilted his head slightly toward the rear galley. Anders gave an almost imperceptible nod before murmuring something to his men. The message was clear without a word being spoken. "Meet me in the back." "I need to stretch my legs," Elijah told Harper, who was still scrolling through articles about his mysterious discharge. "Back in a minute." Harper glanced up, suspicion evident in her green eyes. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Elijah replied, his calm voice betraying none of the urgency he felt. He made his way toward the rear of the aircraft, passing through the narrow aisle with the measured steps of a man accustomed to moving unnoticed despite his size. The teen vlogger tracked him with his camera for a moment before returning to filming other passengers. Anders joined him in the rear galley a minute later, positioning himself so they appeared to be just two strangers waiting for the lavatory. His body language was casual, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "This isn't a coincidence," Elijah said quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Anders nodded. "Braxley's using an alias. Turner. My team spotted him during boarding." "I know Braxley's on board," Elijah said, his eyes meeting Anders. "If I die on this plane, they'll say I hijacked it." Instead of surprise or disbelief, Anders' face hardened with grim understanding. "After Sudan, I know he'd do it." The confirmation sent a chill through Elijah's spine. If Anders believed him without question, the situation was even more serious than he'd feared. "Timeline?" Anders asked. 45 minutes from takeoff. We're down to about 30 now." Anders checked the positions of the flight attendants before, responding. "My team's with you. What's the play?" "Keep it covert for now," Elijah advised. "Something's in the cargo hold. Your man Thompson sensed it." "He's good at his job," Anders confirmed. "I'll send him down to investigate." "What about you?" "I need to figure out what's in that laptop bag that was swapped." Anders nodded. "Watch your six. That head stewardess has been eyeing you since boarding." "Claire," Elijah supplied. "Yeah, she's involved somehow." "We'll create a distraction if you need it," Anders offered. "Not yet. Too many civilians." Elijah's Gaze drifted toward the cabin, where over 100 innocent passengers sat unaware of the danger surrounding them. Keep it quiet until we know what we're dealing with. They separated without another word, Anders returning to his team while Elijah headed back to his seat. As he passed through the mid-cabin section, Claire stepped directly into his path, her professional smile replaced by a hard stare. "Sir, we've had complaints about you intimidating other passengers," she announced loudly, drawing attention from nearby rows. Elijah froze, instantly recognizing the setup. "I haven't spoken to anyone except my seatmate." "Several passengers report feeling threatened by your behavior," Claire continued, her voice pitched to Carrie. "Please return to your seat immediately." From the corner of his eye, Elijah noticed a man in a dark suit rising from his seat, the second air marshal on board. The first one had been easy to spot during boarding, but this one had stayed hidden. His hand drifted toward his jacket, an emotion Elijah recognized all too well. "I'm returning to my seat now," Elijah said calmly, raising his hand slightly, to show he wasn't a threat. The last thing he needed was to be restrained, or worse, shot, before he could uncover Braxley's plan. As he moved past Claire, she whispered, "Next time, it won't be a warning." The teen vlogger had captured the entire confrontation. As Elijah passed his row, the boy whispered, "That was messed up, man. I got it all on video." Elijah gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. Evidence might be useful later, if there was a later. When he returned to his seat, Harper was waiting with wide eyes. "What was that about?" "Part of a bigger problem," Elijah replied, buckling his seatbelt. He nodded toward her phone. "You've been researching me." Harper had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm sorry. When I saw how they treated you, I got curious." "And what did you find?" "Contradictions," she admitted. "Decorated veteran with multiple commendations, then suddenly a dishonorable discharge under sealed circumstances." She paused. "Something about Sudan." Elijah's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened. "The official record isn't always the truth." "I've learned that," Harper said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That man who swapped bags, I think I can get access to the laptop. The woman he gave it to just went to the bathroom and left it under her seat." Elijah studied her face. "Why? Would you help me?" "Because something's wrong on this plane," Harper replied with unexpected steel in her voice. "And I think you're trying to fix it." Elijah considered his options. Harper was a civilian, involving her carried risks. But time was running short, and he needed to know what was on that laptop. "Can you access it without being noticed?" Harper nodded. "I used to help my dad debug computers. I know how to bypass basic security." "Do it," Elijah decided. "But be careful. These people aren't playing games." Harper slipped out of her seat, casually retrieving a water bottle that had rolled under the row ahead. As she bent down, she smoothly pulled the laptop bag from beneath the empty seat and returned to Elijah, the bag concealed against her body. In one fluid motion, she passed it to Elijah, who placed it on his lap, shielding it from view with his jacket. "Keep watch," he murmured, opening the bag just enough to see inside. The laptop itself was a standard business model, but attached to its side was a military-grade external drive, the kind used for secure data transport in classified operations. Elijah recognized the encryption markers immediately. "I need a few minutes with this," he told Harper. "Can you create a distraction if the woman returns?" "Already planned," Harper confirmed, holding up her water bottle with a mischievous smile. "Accidental spill coming right up if needed." Meanwhile, in the cargo hold, Thompson had managed to access the lower deck through a maintenance hatch, using his phone's flashlight. He scanned the dimly lit space, moving silently among the stacked luggage and cargo containers. A thermal imaging app on his device led him to a nondescript metal case secured to the bulkhead. Unlike standard cargo, this case had a digital lock and warning labels in multiple languages. Thompson photographed the serial numbers and markings before attempting to get closer. As he approached, a motion sensor on the case activated. A nearly silent hiss escaped from a tiny valve on its side. Thompson immediately recognized the danger and tried to retreat, but the colorless, odorless gas had already been released. He stumbled, his specially trained body fighting the powerful sedative, but within seconds he collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Up in first class, Braxley received a notification on his phone. Intruder neutralized. Cargo secure. He smiled, slightly before typing a response. Proceed with extraction. Get him on record. Release the gas if needed. The message sent, Braxley stood and straightened his expensive suit. With the confident authority of a man accustomed to command, he walked to the cockpit door and showed an ID to the flight attendant stationed there. Federal Air Marshal Director, he said smoothly. Security protocol override. I need immediate access. The attendant hesitated only briefly before allowing him entry, unaware that the ID was as false as the name he was traveling under. In coach, Elijah had managed to power up the laptop. As he'd suspected, it was heavily encrypted, but Harper proved surprisingly adept at navigating past the initial security layers. My dad taught me a few tricks, she explained, as her fingers flew over the keyboard. Plus, I did a cybersecurity internship last summer. After several tense minutes, they accessed the main drive. What they found made Elijah's blood run cold. These are military troop positions, he murmured, scanning the data. But they're wrong. These units aren't deployed. Here. He pointed to a map showing U.S. forces allegedly positioned near the Russian border. Why would someone falsify military deployments? Harper asked. To create a false flag, Elijah explained grimly. Make it look like we're positioning for aggression, when we're not. He continued scrolling through the files. This is just part of it. There's more to Braxley's plan. As if on cue, Anders appeared beside their row, his expression grim. Thompson's missing. He went to check the cargo bay 20 minutes ago. No contact since. Elijah's jaw tightened. Braxley's making his move. We need to... He was interrupted by a sudden change in the plane's trajectory, a slight banking turn that most passengers wouldn't notice, but that both military men recognized instantly. We're off course, Anders confirmed quietly. At that moment, Commander Davis, one of Anders's SEALs, approached hurriedly. Sir, Braxley just entered the cockpit using some kind of security override. The pieces fell into place in Elijah's mind with sickening clarity. He's taking control of the flight. We're running out of time. Harper, who had been listening intently, suddenly gasped as she uncovered a hidden folder on the laptop. Elijah, there's something you need to see. She turned the screen toward him. The folder contained detailed dossiers on everyone aboard Flight 303, including Elijah himself. But what caught his attention was the file labeled Operation Clean Slate, Sudan Witnesses. He's eliminating everyone who knows the truth, Elijah realized aloud. This isn't just about me. Harper's face had gone pale. My father, William Bennett. He was one of the aid workers in Sudan. Elijah stared at her in shock. Your father was there? He died during that operation, Harper said, her voice barely above a whisper. The official report said he was killed because a soldier abandoned his post. Her eyes met Elijah's, a mixture of pain and dawning realization in them. They said it was your fault. The revelation hung between them, heavy with implications. Before Elijah could respond, the cabin oxygen mask suddenly dropped from the ceiling with a series of sharp pops. Panic erupted throughout the cabin as passengers reached for their masks. But Elijah's trained eye caught something others would miss, a faint mist being released from the ventilation system along with the oxygen. Don't breathe it in, he shouted, jumping to his feet. It's a setup. Chaos erupted throughout the cabin. Screams and shouts filled the air as passengers frantically grabbed for the dangling oxygen masks. Parents struggled to secure masks on terrified children while flight attendants attempted to maintain order, their practiced emergency procedures crumbling in the face of genuine panic. Elijah moved with decisive speed, pulling his jacket up to cover his nose and mouth. It's not decompression, he called out to those nearest him. Don't use the masks. Some listened, their survival instincts responding to the authority in his voice. Others, conditioned by years of safety demonstrations, pulled the masks over their faces. Several immediately slumped in their seats, unconscious. Harper followed Elijah's lead, covering her face with her sweater. "What's happening?" "Knockout gas," Elijah explained tersely, his voice muffled through the fabric. "Non-lethal, but it'll incapacitate everyone who breathes it." Anders and his remaining SEAL were already in motion, helping nearby passengers remove their masks and cover their faces. But the gas continued to pump through the ventilation system, filling the cabin with an invisible threat. Elijah's military training kicked in. He reached up to the overhead panel, fingers searching for the access latch he knew would be there. With a powerful jerk, he tore the panel open, exposing the tangle of wires and tubing behind it. "Sir, you can't do that," a flight attendant cried, stumbling toward him through the chaos. Elijah ignored her, his focus entirely on identifying the secondary air circuit, the one that would be carrying the sedative gas. Years of aircraft sabotage training during his special ops days guided his hands as he traced the lines, found the junction point, and yanked hard, disconnecting the auxiliary feed. The mist thinning visibly as the flow was interrupted, but the damage was already done. At least a third of the passengers were unconscious, and others were showing signs of disorientation and drowsiness. Commander Anders fought his way back to Elijah, his movements slowed by the effects of the gas he'd been unable to completely avoid. "I'm going after Thompson," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Something's in that cargo hold." "Take Harper with you," Elijah directed, nodding toward the young woman who was helping an elderly passenger remove her mask. "She stays safe. Understood?" Anders nodded grimly. "What about you?" "I'm going after Claire. She knows what Braxley's planning." They separated, each with their own mission as the plane continued its unauthorized course change. The cabin crew, now in full emergency mode, were too busy attending to affected passengers to stop them. Anders collected Harper and his remaining conscious team member, heading toward the rear of the aircraft where access to the cargo hold could be found. Elijah moved in the opposite direction, tracking Claire's movements through the chaotic cabin. He found her in the forward galley, frantically speaking into a phone. Her back was to him, allowing Elijah to approach undetected. "It's out of control," she was saying, her voice trembling. "People are having seizures. This wasn't part of the—" Elijah plucked the phone from her hand, ending the call. Claire spun around, her eyes widening in terror when she saw who had interrupted her. "What did Braxley tell you was going to happen today?" Elijah demanded, blocking her escape route. "I don't know what you're talking about," Claire attempted, her professional mask slipping back into place. "Sir, you need to return to your seat. We're experiencing—" "Cut the act," Elijah interrupted. "I know you're working with Braxley. I know about the gas. I know this flight isn't going where it's supposed to. What I don't know is why." Claire's facade crumbled. "I was told you'd try to crash the plane," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "They said you were a terrorist, that you'd hijacked flights before. And you believe that?" "I checked your record," Claire defended, her voice breaking. "Dishonorable discharge, suspected ties to extremist groups. It's all there." "All fabricated," Elijah countered, "by the man currently in your cockpit." Claire's eyes darted toward the cockpit door, visible from their position in the galley. "They said no one would get hurt," she admitted. Just that we'd catch you in the act. I didn't know they'd hurt people." Elijah's expression hardened. "What's the full plan, Claire? Where is this plane headed?" "Someplace called Sight." "Delta," she replied, visibly crumbling under the weight of her complicity. "A private airstrip. Braxley said it would be safe, that it was just a training exercise gone public." "It's not training," Elijah said grimly. "It's an execution." Meanwhile, Anders had managed to reach the cargo hold with Harper and Davis in tow. They found Thompson unconscious near a large metal container, his breathing shallow but stable. "What is that thing?" Harper asked, pointing to the container that Thompson had clearly been investigating. Anders approached cautiously, examining the case without touching it. "Biological containment unit," he said, recognizing the military markings. "High security. Whatever's inside is classified and dangerous." Harper looked from the container to Thompson's unconscious form. "You think this is connected to the gas in the cabin?" Different delivery system, Anders noted, pointing to a small valve on the container's side. This is designed for direct exposure, not airborne distribution. His expression darkened. But they're definitely related. Davis checked Thompson's vital signs. He's stable, but we need to move him. As they prepared to carry Thompson back to the cabin, Harper noticed a tablet secured to the side of the containment unit. "Wait," she said, stopping Anders as he was about to lift Thompson. "There's information here." She carefully detached the tablet and powered it on, grateful that her cybersecurity internship had taught her more than just basic hacking. "It's locked, but I might be able to—" The screen suddenly unlocked itself, recognizing Anders's proximity. "Command authorization detected," an automated voice announced. "Welcome, Commander Anders." Anders exchanged a startled look with Davis. They knew we'd be on this flight, he realized. This was programmed specifically to recognize me. The tablet displayed a series of files, the top one labeled Operation Clean Slate, Activation Protocols. Harper opened it, revealing a detailed timeline of the very events currently unfolding on the flight. "Oh my God," she breathed as she scanned the document. "This is all planned, the gas, the course change, everything." She looked up at Anders, horror in her eyes. "There's more. Once we land at Site Delta, the real plan begins." Back in the main cabin, Elijah had extracted as much information from Claire as she knew, which wasn't nearly enough. He made his way toward first class, determined to confront Braxley directly, when the teen vlogger intercepted him. "Dude, I've been filming everything," the teen said, his eyes wide with the excitement of someone too young to fully grasp the danger. "That flight attendant set you up. I got it all. It's already online." Elijah paused. "What do you mean online?" "I'm live streaming," the teen explained, showing Elijah his phone. "My channel has like 20,000 followers. They're all watching right now." On the screen, Elijah could see the chat feed scrolling rapidly as viewers reacted to the unfolding drama. The view counter showed over 15,000 people currently watching. This changed everything. Witnesses, public record, evidence that couldn't be easily erased or altered. For the first time since boarding, Elijah felt a glimmer of hope. "Keep filming," he told the teen. "Document everything, but stay safe." In the cockpit, Braxley was monitoring communications on a secure channel when an aide's voice came through his earpiece. "Sir, we have a problem. The incident is being live-streamed. It's trending." Braxley's composed expression faltered momentarily. "How many viewers?" 15,000 and climbing. Major civil rights accounts are already sharing it. And, sir, several of Walker's former unit members have recognized him. They're speaking out online." Braxley cursed under his breath. This complicated matters, but the core plan could still succeed. "Proceed as planned," he ordered. "We're too close to abort now." Using the pilot's communication system, Braxley sent a coded message to his operatives on the ground. "Accelerate timeline. Prepare for immediate extraction upon landing. Use the gas if needed." Harper, Anders, and Davis had returned to the main cabin, bringing the still unconscious Thompson with them. They regrouped with Elijah near the middle of the aircraft, away from curious eyes and ears. "It's worse than we thought," Harper told Elijah, showing him the tablet. "Braxley's plan isn't just about you." Elijah scanned the documents, his expression growing darker with each swipe of his finger. "A false flag operation," he confirmed. "Once the gas kills a few passengers and I'm blamed, Braxley's private security firm swoops in to save the remaining hostages. His company gets the credit for stopping a terrorist," Anders added, "and the Pentagon awards them the $100 billion defense contract they've been lobbying for." "But that's not all," Harper continued, her voice shaking slightly. "According to this, they're planning to use this incident to justify a new bioweapon defense program. The container downstairs contains a biological agent, not lethal, but dangerous enough to create panic. And I'm the perfect scapegoat," Elijah said grimly. "The disgraced veteran with a grudge against the military establishment." Davis looked between them. "We need to regain control of this aircraft before we reach Site Delta." "Agreed," Elijah nodded. "But we need to be smart about this." Braxley will have contingencies. Harper checked the teen's live stream on her phone. The video's up to 40,000 viewers now. People are demanding answers. Your name is trending, Elijah. This new development had potential. Can you use that? Elijah asked her. Get the truth out there? Harper's eyes lit up with understanding. I can do better than that. She pulled out her own phone and opened a secure messaging app. I have contacts from my internship, whistleblower servers that can't be taken down. While Harper worked on uploading the flight logs and evidence they'd gathered, Elijah and Anders formulated a plan to retake the cockpit. They enlisted several passengers who had military or law enforcement backgrounds, forming a small but determined team. We have 8 minutes before we reach Site Delta, Anders informed them after checking the navigational data on the tablet. Once we land there, we're on Braxley's territory. No media, no witnesses except the ones he controls. Then we move now, Elijah decided. As they prepared to make their move, the original pilot of Flight 303 approached their group. Captain Reynolds had been locked out of his own cockpit but had been monitoring the situation from the cabin. I might be able to help, he offered, his professional demeanor intact despite the extraordinary circumstances. There's a back door to the cockpit override system, an emergency protocol that wasn't in the standard operating manual. He handed Elijah a napkin with a series of numbers and letters hastily scribbled on it. It's a biometric override. You'll need to access the emergency panel by the cockpit door. Elijah studied the code, a sense of unease growing within him. Why would this work for me specifically? Reynolds hesitated. Because according to the flight manifest, your palm print was preloaded into the system before takeoff. The implication was clear and chilling. This whole thing was designed for me, Elijah realized. They wanted me to try to access the cockpit. It's a trap, Anders concluded. Elijah nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. If I activate that override, it completes their narrative. Proof that I tried to hijack the plane. But an idea was forming in his mind, a dangerous one, but perhaps their only option. Unless we use their trap against them. He turned to the assembled group, his decision made. I'm going to access that override, but we're going to change the script. With a calm determination born from years of impossible missions, Elijah approached the cockpit door. Whatever happened next would either save everyone aboard Flight 303 or condemn them all. The final countdown had begun. Elijah placed his hand on the biometric scanner, feeling the subtle vibration as it read his palm print. The entire plan hinged on this moment, on his theory that Braxley's arrogance had created a weakness they could exploit. As the scanner completed its work, a soft beep confirmed what Elijah had suspected. The system had been designed specifically to recognize him, to frame him. But in that recognition lay their one chance at survival. The narrative was about to change. The biometric scanner hummed softly as it processed Elijah's palm print, the green light blinking 3 times before turning solid. A mechanical click followed as the emergency override system activated, recognizing the very man it had been designed to frame. I'm in, Elijah said quietly, his calm voice belying the tension coiling through his body. Anders positioned himself beside the cockpit door, ready to move. What's next? Elijah studied the alphanumeric keypad that had appeared beneath the scanner. Captain Reynolds said this code should temporarily disable Braxley's autoroute. It won't give us control, but it'll buy us time. He entered the sequence. From the napkin, his fingers moving with deliberate precision. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the navigation display beside the door flickered, showing their current flight path straightening as the forced route to Site Delta was temporarily overridden. It worked, Harper confirmed, checking the tablet they'd recovered from the cargo hold. Course is stabilizing. Inside the cockpit, Braxley felt the subtle shift in the aircraft's trajectory. He checked the navigation system, his composed expression cracking when he saw the override notification flashing on the screen. Impossible, he muttered, fingers flying over the controls as he attempted to reinstate the programmed route. When that failed, he pulled out his secure phone and dialed a number known to only a handful of people. Walker's accessed the override, he said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled rage. Accelerate the timetable. I want a body before landing. In the main cabin, a man seated in the middle section, unremarkable in appearance. The kind of face you'd forget moments. After seeing it, received a text message. He read it once, deleted it, then casually stood and made his way toward the rear lavatory, passing close to where Elijah and his improvised team were gathered. Davis noticed him first, his SEAL-trained instincts recognizing the subtle signs of another professional, the balanced stance, the controlled scanning of the environment, the hand positioned for quick access to a concealed weapon. Elijah, Davis warned quietly. 3 o'clock, moving toward you. Elijah didn't turn his head, but shifted his weight slightly, preparing. Harper, get behind Anders. The assassin moved with sudden explosive speed, abandoning his cover as he realized he'd been made. His hand emerged from his jacket holding a tactical blade designed to evade metal detectors, a 6-inch carbon fiber weapon with a diamond-coated edge that could slice through Kevlar. Elijah reacted with the lightning reflexes of a combat veteran, catching the man's wrist mid-thrust and driving him backward into the narrow galley. The assassin countered with a knee strike that would have incapacitated most men, but Elijah had been trained to absorb such blows, turning with the impact to reduce its force. What followed was a brutal, close-quarters battle confined to the tight space of the aircraft galley. The assassin was good, professionally trained, possibly ex-special forces, but Elijah fought with the desperation of a man who knew the lives of everyone aboard depended on his success. They crashed against the service cart, sending cups and napkins flying. The assassin slashed again with his blade, opening a shallow cut along Elijah's forearm. Blood welled from the wound, but Elijah barely registered the pain, his focus absolute as he countered with a precision strike to the man's throat. The assassin staggered but recovered quickly, reaching for something in his pocket. Elijah recognized the motion. He was going for a secondary weapon. Before he could complete the movement, Anders and Davis intervened, having fought their way through the panicked passengers who had scattered at the first sign of violence. The 3 military men quickly subdued the assassin, pinning him against the galley wall. "Who sent you?" Elijah demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The assassin's eyes flashed with defiance, then resignation. Before anyone could stop him, he bit down hard on something in his mouth. A false molar containing a fast-acting cyanide capsule, an old-school spy technique that Elijah had encountered only once before in his career. The man convulsed once, then went limp, dead before he hit the floor. Professional, Anders observed grimly. Black Ops trained. Elijah nodded, catching his breath. Braxley's pulling out all the stops. They returned to the main cabin to find the situation evolving rapidly. Word of the attack had spread, and more passengers were rallying to their side, sensing that Elijah and his team represented their best hope for survival. A middle-aged businessman approached them. "I was Army Rangers, sir. 20 years. Whatever you need." A young woman stood beside him. "Emergency medical training. I can help with the injured." Others joined them. A retired police officer, an off-duty firefighter, a nurse. Ordinary people rising to an extraordinary challenge. Harper had been organizing them, her natural leadership abilities emerging in the crisis. "I've assigned teams to care for the passengers affected by the gas," she informed Elijah. "And we've distributed the oxygen tanks from the emergency kits to protect those who were exposed." Elijah felt a surge of admiration for her resilience. "Good work." Claire appeared at the edge of the group, her arm bandaged where she'd been injured in the chaos. Her eyes were red from crying, but her expression was resolute. "I want to help," she said, her voice unsteady but determined. "I can access the cockpit communication logs. There's proof there, recordings of Braxley's calls." Elijah studied her for a moment, weighing her sincerity against the risk of trusting someone who had already betrayed them once. "Why the change of heart?" he asked. Claire's composure cracked. "They told me no one would get hurt, that it was just about catching a dangerous man." She gestured to the unconscious passengers. "I never signed up for this. After a brief hesitation, Elijah nodded. Get those logs, but Davis goes with you. As Claire and Davis headed toward the forward section, Anders pulled Elijah aside. We've got another problem. The tablet's showing a secure satellite uplink from the cockpit. Braxley's making calls. Harper checked the communication logs. He's calling the Pentagon, she confirmed, her face paling. He's telling them you've hijacked the plane and are holding 200 civilians hostage. That's his endgame, Elijah realized. Create a situation so dire that military intervention is authorized. Then I go down as the terrorist, and he emerges as the hero who tried to stop me. We need to get our side of the story out, Anders said. Harper held up her phone. Already on it. The live stream has over 100,000 viewers now. People are demanding answers. Our Flight 303 and Elijah Walker are trending. Anders nodded. Good, but we need military channels too. He pulled out a specialized communication device. I can use SEAL emergency bandwidth to contact trusted commanders. People who know your record, Elijah. Men and women who never believed the official story about Sudan. Do it, Elijah agreed. And send them everything we've got. The live stream, the cargo hold evidence, all of it. While Anders established communications, Elijah checked on the cockpit situation. The temporary override was still holding, but according to the navigation display, they were less than 15 minutes from entering controlled airspace around Denver. Once they were in range of air traffic control, they would need to explain their situation quickly before Braxley could spin his version of events. Claire returned with Davis, holding a small digital recorder. I got it, she said breathlessly. The entire conversation between Braxley and his contact. He specifically ordered the gas to be released and for you to be framed. Elijah took the recorder, hope flickering. This could be the evidence we need. A sudden commotion from the front of the plane drew their attention. The teen vlogger was racing toward them, his face flushed with excitement. Dude, they're scrambling fighters, he exclaimed, showing Elijah his phone screen. Some guy on Reddit, who monitors military frequencies, says 2 F-22s just took off from Peterson Space Force Base with orders to intercept a rogue civilian aircraft. Elijah exchanged a grim look with Anders. Fighter jets meant the situation had escalated beyond their worst fears. If they couldn't prove their innocence before those jets arrived, standard protocol would authorize them to shoot down the airliner rather than allow it to reach a populated area. How long? Elijah asked. 10 minutes, maybe less, the teen replied, suddenly understanding the gravity of the situation. Oh shit. They're going to shoot us down, aren't they? Not if we can help it, Elijah assured him, though the challenge ahead seemed nearly insurmountable. Harper had been unusually quiet, her attention focused on the laptop they'd recovered earlier. Elijah, she called, her voice tight with urgency. I found something. There's an encrypted file I just managed to access. It's labeled Operation Reclamation. She turned the screen toward him, her eyes wide. This isn't just about this flight, she whispered. It's global. Elijah scanned the document, his expression darkening as he absorbed the implications. Operation Reclamation outlined a comprehensive initiative using staged biothreats on civilian targets to justify massive military funding redirected to private security firms, specifically Braxley's company. Flight 303 was designated as Phase 1 Proof of Concept. Son of a bitch, Elijah muttered. He's using us as a test case. Anders read over his shoulder, his professional composure slipping for the first time. If this works, they'll replicate it. Multiple targets, multiple scapegoats. We need to get this to the right people, Elijah decided. Not just military, FBI, Homeland Security, anyone who can stop this from spreading. The captain's voice suddenly came over the intercom, strained but professional. This is Captain Reynolds. Our aircraft has been designated as hostile by air traffic control. We've been instructed to maintain our current heading and prepare for military intercept. Please remain calm and follow crew instructions. The announcement sent a fresh wave of panic through the cabin. Parents clutched children closer, couples held hands, and several passengers began to pray. Elijah turned to Anders. We're out of time. We need to regain control of this aircraft now. What's the play? Anders asked. I'm going to speak to the passengers. Then we take the cockpit. Elijah moved to the center of the cabin and asked for the intercom handset. After a moment's hesitation, a flight attendant passed it to him. "This is Staff Sergeant Elijah Walker," he began, his deep voice steady and commanding. "Some of you may have heard rumors about what's happening on this flight. I want to tell you the truth." He explained the situation in clear, concise terms. Braxley's plot, the false terrorist narrative, the evidence they'd uncovered. He didn't sugarcoat the danger they were in, but offered something more valuable than false reassurance. A plan. "We have 7 minutes before fighter jets reach us," he concluded. "I need your help to regain control of this aircraft and communicate our situation to the authorities. This isn't just about saving ourselves. It's about stopping a conspiracy that threatens countless other innocent lives." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Passengers who had been paralyzed by fear now found purpose in action. They organized themselves under Harper's direction, some helping to care for the injured, others preparing to support the cockpit breach. Through the cabin windows, the first glint of sunlight reflecting off metal could be seen. The approaching fighter jets now visible in the distance. "Time to move," Elijah told his core team. "Anders, Davis, you're with me. Harper, keep coordinating from here and continue uploading evidence." As they prepared to move toward the cockpit, the plane's PA system crackled to life again. This time it was Braxley's voice that filled the cabin. "This is Federal Air Marshal Director James Turner," he announced, using his cover identity. The man calling himself Elijah Walker is a known terrorist with connections to extremist groups. He has placed a biological weapon in the cargo hold of this aircraft. Do not assist him. Remain in your seats and await military rescue. The declaration was met with skeptical murmurs rather than the panic Braxley had intended. The passengers had seen too much, heard too much to simply accept his version of events. Elijah picked up the intercom again. "That man is General William Braxley. He's the one who planted the bioweapon. The evidence has already been uploaded to federal authorities and is trending on social media. You can check your phones. The truth is out there." A chorus of affirmations rose from passengers who had been following the viral story on their devices. Braxley's narrative was collapsing in real time. "Let's end this," Elijah said to Anders and Davis, and the three men moved toward the cockpit. As Elijah, Anders, and Davis approached the forward cabin, the cockpit door suddenly opened. Braxley emerged, no longer bothering with his Turner disguise, his face a mask of cold fury. He held Captain Reynolds at gunpoint, a military-issue sidearm pressed against the pilot's temple. "That's far enough, Walker," Braxley commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. The cabin fell silent, the confrontation freezing everyone in place. Even the most determined passengers recognized the deadly seriousness of the standoff. "It's over, Braxley," Elijah said calmly. "Your plan's exposed. The evidence is already public." Braxley's expression didn't change. "Nothing's over until I say it is. I still control this aircraft, and I have a direct line to the Pentagon. One word from me, and those F-22s out there light us up like the 4th of July." Elijah took a careful step forward, his hands visible. "Is that what you want? To die here? Because that's where this ends if you don't stand down." "Always the hero," Braxley sneered. "That was your problem in Sudan, too. Couldn't follow orders, had to save everyone." "I saved you," Elijah reminded him, his voice hardening. "When the rebels attacked your position, I pulled you out of that burning building. And you repaid me by destroying my career, my reputation, everything." Something flickered in Braxley's eyes, a momentary uncertainty that suggested Elijah's words had found their mark. But it vanished quickly, replaced by cold calculation. "Those fighters will be here in 5 minutes, Braxley said. "I'm taking this plane to Site Delta. Anyone who interferes dies first." He began backing toward the cockpit, dragging the captain with him. Before he could reach the door, Harper's voice rang out from the main cabin. "We've decoded Operation Reclamation," she called, drawing Braxley's attention momentarily away from Elijah. "It outlines your entire initiative using staged biothreats to secure military funding. The files are being sent to every major news outlet right now." Braxley's composure slipped for a crucial second. In that moment of distraction, Captain Reynolds drove his elbow backward into Braxley's solar plexus. The general grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for Reynolds to twist away. Elijah moved with explosive speed, closing the distance before Braxley could recover. The two men collided in a violent struggle for the weapon, their bodies crashing against the bulkhead with bone-jarring force. Braxley was no desk general. Despite his age, he was combat-trained and physically powerful. He fought with the desperation of a man who knew his entire future hung in the balance of the next few seconds. The gun discharged once, the sound deafening in the confined space of the aircraft. Passengers screamed and ducked for cover. The bullet punched through the ceiling, missing everyone but sending a shower of plastic fragments raining down. Anders and Davis joined the fray, helping Elijah to finally subdue Braxley. They secured his weapon and restrained him using zip ties from the aircraft's emergency kit. "Get the captain back to the controls," Elijah ordered, breathing heavily from the exertion. "We need to re-establish communication with air traffic control immediately." Reynolds staggered to his feet, visibly shaken but determined. "I can do it, but the override systems, already disabled," Anders assured him, displaying the tablet. "We've bypassed Braxley's protocols. The aircraft is yours again, Captain." Reynolds nodded gratefully and returned to the cockpit, where his co-pilot was already working to regain control of their systems. Harper rushed forward, tablet in hand. "The fighters are closing in, 2 minutes at most. Can we contact them directly?" Elijah asked. Anders shook his head. "Not without military channels. But air traffic control can relay our situation if we can convince them we're no longer hostile." The next 2 minutes were perhaps the most tense of Elijah's entire career. Captain Reynolds established contact with Denver Air Traffic Control, calmly explaining that the aircraft had been temporarily hijacked, but was now secure. He transmitted the emergency authentication codes that verified his identity and control of the plane. Meanwhile, the fighter jets had taken up escort positions on either side of Flight 303, clearly visible through the cabin windows. Their presence was both reassuring and terrifying. Protection if their story was believed, destruction if it wasn't. Air traffic control's response was cautious but receptive. They requested visual confirmation that the cockpit was secure and operated by the legitimate flight crew. Captain Reynolds activated the cockpit camera, allowing controllers to see him and his co-pilot at the controls, with no signs of duress. "Denver Control, this is Captain Michael Reynolds of Flight 303, he stated clearly. "We are declaring an emergency situation. Our aircraft was compromised by a military officer attempting a false flag operation. We have regained control and request immediate landing clearance." After what seemed like an eternity, the controller responded, "Flight 303, we're in contact with Peterson Space Force Base. Fighter escort will remain in position, but weapons systems have been safed. You are cleared for priority landing at Denver International, runway 26 right." A cheer erupted throughout the cabin. Passengers hugged one another, some crying with relief. The immediate danger of being shot down had passed, but they weren't safe yet. "We're not out of the woods," Elijah cautioned his team. "Braxley still has allies on the ground. And that container in the cargo hold remains a threat." Anders nodded grimly. "Davis and I will secure the cargo area until landing. Make sure nothing happens to that bioweapon." As the SEALs headed toward the rear of the aircraft, Harper approached Elijah, her expression troubled. "The FAA has officially marked us as a rogue vessel," she reported, showing him her phone. "They're telling us to hold course and wait for military contact on the ground." "Expected," Elijah replied. "Braxley's contingency plans would include official channels, but we've got something he didn't count on." "What's that?" "Public exposure." Elijah gestured to the teen vlogger who was still filming. "How many viewers now?" "Over 3 million, the teen answered proudly. "It's being picked up by major news networks. They're interrupting regular broadcasts to cover this." The public nature of the crisis was proving to be their greatest asset. With millions of people watching in real time, it would be nearly impossible for Braxley's allies to implement a cover-up. Captain Reynolds' voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've been cleared for emergency landing at Denver International Airport. We'll be on the ground in approximately 12 minutes. Please return to your seats and prepare for landing. As passengers complied with the captain's instructions, Elijah made his way back to where Braxley was being held. The general sat rigidly in a first-class seat, his wrists bound before him, his expression a mask of cold hatred. "You've lost, Braxley," Elijah said quietly, taking the seat opposite him. "The truth about Sudan, about this operation, about everything, it's all coming out." Braxley's lip curled in disdain. "You think this ends with me? Reclamation has supporters at the highest levels, people who understand what's necessary for national security. Terrorizing your own citizens isn't national security," Elijah countered. "It's treason." Something dangerous flashed in Braxley's eyes. "You always were short-sighted, Walker, too focused on individual lives to see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture is made up of individual lives," Elijah replied. "Something you never understood." Braxley leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You die, I die. But you go down a terrorist." The quiet threat sent a chill through Elijah. "What are you talking about? Did you think the bioweapon was the only insurance policy?" Braxley's smile was cold. "There's a backup device in the cargo hold, remotely activated. One press of a button, and this plane becomes a crater." Elijah studied the general's face, looking for signs of a bluff. Finding none, he stood immediately and moved toward the intercom, calling for Anders. "Possible explosive device in the cargo hold," he reported when the SEAL responded. "Braxley claims he can trigger it remotely." Anders's response was immediate. "On it. We'll need to access the lower deck during descent." "That's impossible," Harper interjected. "The pressure differential during descent would make opening the cargo access dangerous." "We don't have a choice," Anders replied. "If that device is real, we need to disarm it before Braxley can activate it." Captain Reynolds, listening via the cockpit intercom, offered a solution. "I can depressurize the cargo area gradually during our approach. It will be rough, but it should allow access without catastrophic decompression." Elijah nodded. "Do it." What followed was one of the most daring mid-air operations ever attempted on a commercial aircraft. As Flight 303 began its descent toward Denver, Captain Reynolds carefully managed the cabin pressure while Anders and Davis prepared to access the cargo hold. The maneuver required split-second timing and nerves of steel. When the pressure equalized enough to allow safe access, Anders and his team dropped through the maintenance hatch into the dimly lit cargo bay below. The scene in the main cabin was tense but controlled. Harper organized the passengers, ensuring everyone was secure for what would likely be a rough landing. The injured were attended to by those with medical training, while others monitored Braxley to ensure he couldn't access any hidden devices. An elderly woman seated near Elijah touched his arm gently. "I recognize you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My son was in the unit you saved in '08, in Kandahar. He told me about you, said you went back for men others had written off." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never forgot your name. All these years, I've prayed for you." The simple, heartfelt acknowledgement struck Elijah deeply. After years of living under the shadow of Braxley's lies, here was someone who knew the truth, who had carried it faithfully all this time. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied softly, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. Meanwhile, in the cargo hold, Anders and Davis worked feverishly to locate and disarm the backup device Braxley had threatened them with. Using specialized equipment, they scanned the containers until they found an anomalous reading coming from a nondescript shipping crate. "Got it," Davis reported, carefully opening the crate to reveal a sophisticated explosive device with a remote trigger, military grade, set to receive an encrypted activation signal. "Can you disarm it?" Anders asked, keeping one eye on his watch. They were less than 5 minutes from landing. Davis studied the device, his specialized training kicking in. "Yes, but I'll need to disconnect the receiver first, then the detonator. One wrong move." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Both men knew the stakes. With steady hands that belied the zero-gravity-like conditions of the depressurized cargo hold, during descent, Davis methodically disarmed the device component by component. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold air. his complete focus on the deadly task before him. "Receiver disabled," he reported after what seemed like an eternity. Moving to the detonator now. Above in the main cabin, Elijah received the update via radio. "They found the device and are disarming it now," he informed Harper and the others. Braxley, overhearing this, struggled against his restraints with renewed fury. "This isn't over, Walker." Elijah ignored him, his attention on the radio as he waited for the final confirmation. Seconds stretched into minutes as the ground grew ever closer outside the windows. Finally, Anders's voice crackled through. "Device neutralized. I repeat, device neutralized. We're secure." A collective sigh of relief swept through those aware of the danger. They had eliminated the last major threat. Now they just needed to land safely and ensure Braxley faced justice. As if on cue, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're on final approach to Denver International. Emergency services are standing by. Please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened until we come to a complete stop." The atmosphere in the cabin was charged with tension and hope as Flight 303 descended toward the runway. Through the windows, passengers could see a massive emergency response waiting, police vehicles, ambulances, fire trucks, and military personnel forming a perimeter around their designated landing area. The landing itself was textbook perfect, Captain Reynolds demonstrating the skill that had earned him his position as the wheels touched down smoothly on the tarmac. The aircraft rolled to a stop, surrounded immediately by emergency vehicles. "Landing clearance granted," Harper reported, reading from her phone. A senator watching the viral livestream demanded air traffic allow the flight to land safely. "They've sent a military escort to protect you, Elijah." For the first time since the ordeal began, Elijah allowed himself to believe they might actually have won. The truth was out. Braxley was in custody. The evidence was secure. But as the jetway connected and the doors prepared to open, Braxley made his final desperate move. With a strength born of desperation, he broke free from his restraints, having worked at them methodically throughout the descent. Before anyone could react, he pulled a small backup weapon from a hidden ankle holster, a deadly derringer that had escaped detection. His eyes locked on Harper, recognizing her as the one who had exposed Operation Reclamation. "You!" he snarled, raising the weapon. Elijah saw it happening as if in slow motion, the gun rising, Harper frozen in shock, the passengers around them only beginning to register the new threat. There was no time to think, only to act. As the wheels touched the runway and their harrowing flight finally came to an end, Elijah lunged toward Braxley, determined that no more innocent blood would be shed because of the general's twisted ambitions. The final confrontation had begun. The sound of gunfire echoed through the cabin, sharp and deafening in the enclosed space. Passengers screamed and ducked for cover as Braxley's shot went wide, missing Harper but striking the seat beside her. Claire, who had been standing nearby, jumped instinctively in front of Harper, taking a bullet to her shoulder. She cried out, in pain, and collapsed to the floor, clutching her wounded arm. "Claire!" Harper knelt beside the flight attendant, pressing her hand against the bleeding wound. "I'm okay," Claire gasped, her face pale but determined. "It's not deep." Elijah launched himself at Braxley, his powerful frame colliding with the general's. As they crashed into the aisle, the impact sent the small derringer skittering across the floor, where Anders quickly secured it. "It's over, Braxley," Elijah growled, pinning the older man down. But Braxley was far from finished. With the desperate strength of a cornered predator, he drove his knee upward, catching Elijah in the abdomen. The blow was enough to create separation, allowing Braxley to scramble to his feet. What followed was a brutal hand-to-hand fight that seemed to unleash years of pent-up rage and betrayal. As they exchanged blows in the narrow confines of the aircraft aisle, flashes of their shared history surfaced in Elijah's mind. Sudan. The desert heat. Elijah pulling a wounded Braxley from the burning command post, the lieutenant's face streaked with blood and dust. A punch connected with Elijah's jaw, snapping his head back. The closed-door Senate hearing. Braxley in his dress uniform, medals gleaming as he solemnly testified about Elijah's reckless insubordination that had endangered the mission and American lives. Elijah countered with a strike to Braxley's ribs, feeling something give beneath. His fist, the day his discharge papers arrived. The looks on his teammates' faces, disbelief, anger, helpless sympathy. The weight of the medals they'd taken back, heavier somehow in their absence than they'd ever been on his chest. Braxley slammed Elijah against a seat row, passengers scrambling to get out of the way as the two men fought with a ferocity born of deep, personal hatred. "You could have had everything," Braxley hissed, blood trickling from his split lip. "If you'd just followed orders, left those civilians, like you left them to die," Elijah countered, blocking a strike aimed at his throat. "I made the right call. You just couldn't admit you were wrong." The teen vlogger was filming the entire confrontation, his hands shaking but his camera steady as he captured what would become one of the most viewed videos in internet history. The passengers watched in stunned silence, the violence before them, unlike anything they'd ever witnessed outside of movies. This wasn't choreographed action. It was raw, desperate combat between two highly trained warriors with a blood debt between them. Braxley fought with the calculated precision of a man who had risen through the ranks by being better, smarter, and more ruthless than his peers. Each movement was economical, designed to disable or kill with minimum effort. Elijah countered with the adaptability and strength that had made him an exceptional soldier, absorbing blows when necessary, striking decisively when openings appeared, never wasting energy on flashy moves that wouldn't end the fight. For a moment, it seemed evenly matched. Then Braxley reached into his boot and pulled out a slim tactical blade, its edge glinting under the cabin lights. "Always have a backup," he snarled, slashing toward Elijah's throat. Elijah jerked backward, the blade missing his carotid artery by millimeters. He grabbed Braxley's wrist with both hands, using his superior strength to force the knife away from his body. They struggled for control of the weapon, muscles straining, neither man willing to yield what both knew would be a fatal advantage. "You're finished, Walker," Braxley grunted, his face contorted with effort. "Even if you win here, the system will protect me. It always has." "Not anymore," Elijah replied, gradually forcing the blade back toward Braxley. "The world is watching. Now." With a sudden shift in leverage, Elijah twisted Braxley's wrist until the general had no choice but to release the knife or suffer a broken arm. The weapon clattered to the floor, kicked away by a quick-thinking passenger. Disarmed but still dangerous, Braxley landed a vicious headbutt that sent Elijah staggering backward. Blood poured from a cut above Elijah's eye, partially blinding him as Braxley pressed his advantage. The general made a break for the emergency exit, clearly planning to deploy the evacuation slide and escape in the chaos that would follow. "He's going for the door," Harper shouted, still tending to Claire's wound. Elijah shook his head to clear his vision, spotting Braxley at the emergency exit. The general was reaching for the handle, a small pack, likely containing a parachute, already in his other hand. With a final surge of energy, Elijah launched himself down the aisle, tackling Braxley just as he began to pull the emergency release. They crashed to the floor together, the impact knocking the wind from both men. This time, Elijah maintained the advantage, pinning Braxley face down with a combat hold that left the general immobile. "You'll stand trial," Elijah growled in Braxley's ear, his voice rough from exertion. "And this time you won't walk free." Outside the aircraft, emergency vehicles surrounded the plane, lights flashing. The jetway was secured, and the main door opened to reveal a contingent of military police and FBI agents streaming aboard. "Federal agents," the lead officer announced. "Everyone remain seated." Anders stepped forward, his military bearing unmistakable as he addressed the entry team. "Commander Luke Anders, Navy SEAL Team 6. We have a high-value detainee requiring immediate secure transport." He gestured to Braxley, still pinned beneath Elijah. "General William Braxley, wanted for conspiracy, attempted murder, and treason." The FBI team hesitated, clearly not expecting this scenario. Their orders had likely been to apprehend a hijacker, not a decorated general. Elijah slowly released Braxley and stood, hands raised to show he wasn't a threat. "The evidence is all here," he said, nodding toward Harper, who held up the tablet containing the Operation Reclamation files, "and about 3 million witnesses watching live." The lead agent glanced at the teen vlogger who was still broadcasting. Then at his phone where alerts were flooding in about the viral situation aboard Flight 303. Making a swift decision, he nodded to his team. "Secure the general," he ordered. "Separate transport, highest security protocols." As Braxley was handcuffed and led away, he locked eyes with Elijah one last time. "This isn't over, Walker," he spat. "Yes, it is," Elijah replied simply. The cabin erupted in applause as Braxley was removed from the aircraft. Passengers who had been through hours of terror now celebrated their survival and the justice they had witnessed firsthand. Harper made her way to Elijah's side, her clothes stained with Claire's blood but her expression radiant with relief and something deeper. Understanding. "You didn't just save us," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You saved the truth," Elijah managed. A faint smile, the exhaustion of the ordeal finally catching up with him. "Your father, in Sudan. I need you to know—" "I know." Harper cut him off gently. "I saw the files. Braxley ordered the extraction team to abandon the aid workers. You refused. You saved everyone you could." Tears welled in her eyes. "My dad didn't die because of you. He died because of Braxley." The weight of years of undeserved guilt began to lift from Elijah's shoulders. He had carried the burden of those deaths for so long, believing that somehow he could have done more, saved more. To have the daughter of one of those he couldn't save understand the truth was a vindication he had never expected. As medical teams boarded to attend to the injured, news crews gathered outside the aircraft, their cameras capturing the aftermath of what would soon be called the Flight 303 incident. The story was breaking across every major network, the livestream footage providing unprecedented real-time documentation of the entire ordeal. Anders approached Elijah, extending his hand. "Hell of a job, Walker." Elijah clasped his hand firmly. "Couldn't have done it without you and your team." "Speaking of which," Anders said, lowering his voice, "a military transport is waiting on the tarmac. They'll take custody of the bioweapon and the evidence. My superiors want to make sure nothing disappears before the investigation begins." Elijah nodded his understanding. In cases like this, evidence had a way of vanishing when powerful interests were threatened. As he prepared to disembark, a military official in civilian clothes approached, leaning in close to speak privately. "They'll still try to bury this," the man warned, his voice barely above a whisper. "You'll need to testify. Are you ready for war?" "Again?" Elijah straightened his shoulders, the resolve clear in his eyes. "Always." 6 weeks later, Elijah Walker walked up the steps of the Capitol building, his olive-green military jacket freshly cleaned, the American flag patch on his sleeve now restored to its original vibrant colors. The autumn air carried a crisp chill, but the sun shone brightly overhead, a fitting metaphor for the new chapter beginning in his life. Inside, the Senate hearing room was packed to capacity. Journalists, military officials, government representatives, and members of the public filled every available seat, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. This was no closed-door session like the one that had destroyed Elijah's career years ago. This time, the whole world was watching. As Elijah took his seat at the witness table, he caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Harper Bennett sat in the front row, her expression encouraging. Behind her, Commander Anders and his team, all in formal uniform, nodded their respect. Even Claire was there, her arm in a sling, but her eyes clear and determined. The chairman called the hearing to order, his gavel striking with a finality that silenced the murmuring crowd. "This joint congressional hearing into the events aboard Flight 303 and the subsequent revelations regarding Operation Reclamation will now come to order," he announced. "Our first witness is Staff Sergeant Elijah Walker." As Elijah was sworn in, cameras flashed and live feeds broadcast his image to millions of viewers worldwide. The story of Flight 303 had captured global attention, sparking outrage and demands for accountability that transcended political divisions. "Sergeant Walker," the chairman began, "please describe for this committee the events that led to your presence on Flight 303 and the subsequent actions of General William Braxley." Elijah leaned toward the microphone, his deep voice steady and clear. "It began in Sudan 5 years ago. Over the next 3 hours, Elijah laid out the complete truth: the mission in Sudan, Braxley's order to abandon civilians, the years of systematic cover-up, and finally, the elaborate plot to eliminate him and anyone else who knew the truth while simultaneously securing a massive defense contract. His testimony was followed by others. Anders providing corroboration, Harper sharing her research findings, and perhaps, most damaging of all, Claire detailing how she had been recruited and manipulated by Braxley's team. "I was told Sergeant Walker was a threat to national security," she explained, tears streaming down her face as she recounted her role in the events. "I believed I was doing my patriotic duty. I never questioned—" She paused, gathering her composure. "I will live with that mistake for the rest of my life." The evidence was overwhelming. Documents from Operation Reclamation revealed a conspiracy, reaching into the highest levels of military contracting and intelligence services. Several defense contractors and generals were indicted in the weeks that followed, their careers ending in disgrace as the full extent of the plot was revealed. Braxley's private security firm, Sentinel Global, was dismantled, its assets frozen pending a complete investigation. The $100 billion defense contract at the center of the conspiracy was suspended, with a congressional oversight committee established to review all military expenditures connected to bioweapon defense programs. 2 months after the hearing, Commander Anders and his SEAL team received commendations for their actions aboard Flight 303. In a quiet ceremony at the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense personally presented them with medals for exceptional service. Anders, ever the professional, accepted the honor with modest dignity, but when asked to say a few words, he surprised everyone by stepping aside. "With respect, sir," he said to the secretary, "the real hero isn't standing on this stage." He gestured to where Elijah sat in the audience. "That man in the jacket, he saved all of us, not just on that plane, but from a corruption that would have poisoned everything we stand for." Harper's journalistic career took an unexpected turn when her first-hand account of the Flight 303 incident went viral. What began as a series of articles evolved into a documentary project titled Flight 303, The Plane They Tried to Silence. The series won critical acclaim, and eventually, a Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism. In one of the most moving segments of the documentary, Harper interviewed the families of aid workers who had been in Sudan during Elijah's mission. One by one, they expressed their gratitude for his refusal to abandon their loved ones, even at the cost of his own career. "My husband came home because of Sergeant Walker's courage," one woman testified, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Our children grew up with their father because one man chose what was right over what was ordered." Justice moved forward with methodical precision. Braxley's trial became one of the most closely watched proceedings in decades, with each revelation further exposing the depth of corruption within certain military and intelligence circles. The general maintained his arrogance throughout, never showing remorse for the lives he had endangered or the careers he had destroyed. The verdict, when it came, was unanimous: guilty on all counts. The judge, a retired military officer himself, delivered a scathing assessment before pronouncing sentence. "You dishonored the uniform you wore and betrayed every principle it represents," he told Braxley. "There can be no greater crime for a man entrusted with the safety and security of this nation." 6 months after Flight 303 landed, a solemn ceremony was held to honor the few passengers who had died from exposure to the bioagent before Elijah had managed to disable the distribution system. Families gathered at a quiet memorial garden, where a simple stone monument bore the names of those lost. Elijah attended, standing slightly apart from the main group, his head bowed in respect. He had saved many lives that day, but the weight of those he couldn't save still rested heavily on his conscience. An older woman approached him after the formal service concluded, her eyes kind but searching. "You're him, aren't you?" "Sergeant Walker?" Elijah nodded, uncertain what to expect. She took his hand between both of hers. "My daughter was on that flight. She told me how you fought for everyone aboard, how you never gave up." Her voice broke slightly. "Thank you for bringing her home to me." Such moments of gratitude became more frequent as time passed, and Elijah's true role in both Sudan and Flight 303 became widely known. The stain on his record was officially removed, his dishonorable discharge converted to an honorable one with full restoration of rank and benefits. But when offered reinstatement to active duty, Elijah declined. His path now led elsewhere. 1 year after the events of Flight 303, Elijah stood on the porch of a modest training center nestled in the Colorado mountains. The sign above the entrance read, Pathfinder Institute, Leadership, Ethics, and Crisis. Response Training. Inside, a diverse group of young veterans gathered in the main hall, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and respect as Elijah entered the room. These were men and women who, like him, had faced impossible choices in the field, some who had made the right call and suffered for it, others who still struggled with the consequences of following flawed orders. "Welcome to Pathfinder," Elijah began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded elite units in the world's most dangerous places. "What we teach here isn't in any military manual. It's about finding the line between duty and conscience, and having the courage to stand there when it matters most." The center had become his life's work, a place where his hard-won wisdom could help shape a new generation of leaders who understood that true service sometimes required the courage to question, to stand firm when ethics and orders collided. Harper visited often, dividing her time between her journalistic career and helping develop the center's curriculum. Their shared experiences had forged a bond that continued to deepen with time. As Elijah concluded the day's session, his assistant approached, with a sealed envelope that had just been delivered. "This came for you, sir. Hand-delivered. No return address." Curious, Elijah opened it in the privacy of his office. Inside was a single photograph, a young man in a doctor's white coat, standing before a clinic in what appeared to be Sudan. On the back, written in a careful hand, were the words, "You saved my life in 2020. Now I save others. Thank you." It was the boy Elijah had carried from a burning building during the Sudan mission, now grown, his life's purpose shaped by the second chance Elijah's courage had given him. Elijah placed the photo carefully on his desk, a profound sense of peace settling over him. After years of living under the shadow of lies and betrayal, the truth had finally prevailed, not just for him, but for all those whose lives had intersected with his during those critical moments of choice. Later that afternoon, Elijah walked out of the center, looking up at the clear Colorado sky. A young boy from the nearby town, who often watched the veterans training, offered a solemn salute as Elijah passed. Without hesitation, Elijah returned it with equal seriousness. And then, for perhaps the first time in years, Elijah Walker smiled, not the guarded half-smile of a man accustomed to hiding his emotions, but the genuine expression of someone who had finally come home to himself. Justice at last. Was justice served at 30,000 feet worth the price these innocent passengers paid? If this story of courage against corruption moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of ordinary heroes facing extraordinary odds.